Hello everybody. Last video we left off talking about conditional statements, or if statements in this case. We're going to talk about a little bit more complexity this time. So I'm just going to make a new file instead of use the one we used last time. More ifs. And if you want to put the date, I would encourage you. Make sure everything's set. So, now I will mention this. Early on, it's pretty easy for me to type these up in a nice leisurely amount of time. But as we go through the class, these programs will probably get larger and larger. So for those much larger programs, you'll probably see me already have the code ready. Of course, by then you will probably be like halfway through the class. So for those, you can pause, write up whatever you need, and I'll talk about each line a bit at a time like I normally do. So let's take a look here. So we'll have a little variable here, just like we did last time. Let's make it 10. Alright, so if number is greater than 10, we print out a little message. We could do several lines of code if we want, but juicy steak. Now, if this is false, we want to do something else. So we want two choices here. So we're going to have an if else. Now the way this works is we have our if like we normally do, and you're going to write the keyword else, and it's going to have its own open and close brace too. Now if the first one is false, it's going to automatically do the else. The else is basically the catch-all. So if I have an if and that doesn't work out, it will run this instead. So it'd be like, I guess you ask somebody a question, there's either a yes, no answer. If they say yes, you do this. Otherwise, there's only one other answer, no, you'll do this. So in this case, we have two choices, one or the other. So in this case, juicy steak or, let's see, what would, big salad. The big salad. So in this particular case, the number is 10, right? So which one of these would run? Do a quick little run. Well, it is not, 10 is not greater than 10. So it's going to run the else, the big salad. Now if I said greater than or equal to, then we would get the juicy steak instead. So I'm trying to hit carnivores and vegetarians at the same time here. So it depends on how you write it. This one little symbol can screw up a lot of code. Many people have spent hours trying to figure out why things aren't working the way they're supposed to, and it just turns out to be this little issue here. Oh, and I should also mention this. If you accidentally hit insert, your cursor will look like this. And what this does is overwrite mode. Control Z, back it up. Now, if I hit insert again, it'll bring you back to insertion mode. This happens in Word and word processors too. So it's just a simple matter of hitting insert and hitting again if you do happen to run into that. Most people hit that weird error once or twice, and if you've never seen it before, it's like, what is that? So I've got an if and an else here. So it's either going to run this or that. You only got two choices, and it's going to pick one of those two. Now, if the first one does run, it will not run the second part. It'll just skip that, go to the brace, and run whatever code is after this. If the second part, if this first part fails, it will run this one, then go to the brace and do whatever else is left. So let's try multiple questions. Let's say there's more than two answers to this particular question. Let's say I have a int number 2 equals 2, let's say. And I want to do something if this is 0 or if it's 1, if it's 2. Now the way most people write this, if number 2 is 0, and then they'll write if number 2 is 1. And that's fine depending on what program you're writing. But it's very possible that in this code you change number 2 to 1 or some other number, and then this will run. It could actually run every single line here. Now if you only want it to run one thing, we need the if else kind of structure here. So what we're going to do here is I'm going to write if else ifs else. So this right here, the only other choice would be 2 for my 3 choices that I'm giving them. And I could use input for this. And that would probably be a good extra practice. Write the same code, but add user input so you can write in 0, 1, or any other. But is really actually any number not 0 and 1. So in this case, we'll print, let's say, what is it? Manamana. Did I spell that right? Ma-na-mana. You can Google that too if you want something in your head for a couple of days. Manamana. Now, if it's 1, we'll say, and actually that should be 2. We'll say it's a small world, after all. Yet another classic that never leaves your head. And last, let's see, if I'm just going to pick a song that will be stuck in your head for years. The first 2 are just so, if you hear them, you're not going to unhear them. So what would be the last one? This is where actually having a class would be great, so people could, you know, toss some out to me. Let's see here. I recall back in the day, DuckTales. You can Google that song too. Probably not quite as stick in your head as the others, but still. Uh, I think there's a new rendition of that out now. Now you'll notice that this first line is yellow. It says replace chain of ifs with switch. Don't worry about that. We'll talk about switch statements later. Uh, this if is perfectly fine. Switch statements are just another kind of way to write ifs. They are more efficient, and we'll talk about why, but in Java can actually change them automatically to it. But we'll leave it as ifs for now. Almost every language uses ifs, else ifs, basically this exact same structure. Not everyone uses the switch statement, just depends. So in this case, I have 3 choices. Now they're all connected by these braces here. So if number is 0, manamana. And else if means I can add basically another statement. If the first statement fails, it'll go to the second statement and check to see if that's true. If that's true, it'll run this, and then it'll go to the end. If the first one's true, it'll run that, go to the end. If none of these are true as I go down, then it'll run this last one, which in this case, it will run DuckTales, as you can see. If I change the number to 0, we'll get manamana, like so. If I change it to, 777, well, DuckTales, because it's any number that's not 0 and 1. Now I can have as many else ifs as I want. I can write, if, else if, else if, else if, else if, and you almost always need an else at the end. If for some odd reason I've seen people, let's say I put an extra brace here or something, you may get this error, legal sort of type. You may get, I'm looking for actually, there it is. else without if. If you see else without if, Shift F, notice how it moved inside this. It's because I'm missing a brace. And that's very, very common for people to miss up braces here. Basically, the way this works is if, else. And again, I can have as many of these else ifs as I want. If I wrote else if, and another place people tend to error. Each of these ifs have to have a condition. Is this this? But an else doesn't have a condition. A lot of people will try to write one in there. Else number 2 equals 2. Well, an else doesn't need that. An else means everything else failed, and this is your last resort, basically. So we don't need any parentheses, any condition. So this would be your if and else. And then a little bit more if we have like 3, 4, 50 choices, depending. Uh, Now, of course, we can get more complicated. We can put an if inside of an if, which we'll talk about later. We can ask for 2 or 3 things at once and check that. Uh, so these are actually one of the things that are pretty much in every single program, and they can get to be some of the more complex parts of the code depending on how much you're trying to put into it. But this is basically a little example of if statements, and I would encourage you to, you know, add your own stuff. Uh, Throw in some input. Uh, don't worry about strings right now because we're going to cover that later. But integers, doubles, those things are pretty easy. Strings, characters, I think you could do potentially, but only not without input, not with input probably. So try playing around with it a little bit and checking, some ifs. Maybe make a little pick a choice, and it says something back to you or something like that. But again, learning is playing with it. The more you play with it, the more you change and try some things, the more you'll pick up.